Nothing is enough for a man to whom enough is too little. I take the liberty
know it sounds funny, but I just can't stand the pain. Girl, I'm leaving you tomorrow. Seems to me, girl, you know I've done all I can. You see, a big stole and I borrowed. Yeah. That's why I'm easy. I'm easy like Sunday morning. That's why I'm easy. I'm easy like Sunday morning. Hast du Angst? Liegst du wach? Hast du Angst? Liegst du wach? Ein Spiegel klärt die Fassade breit. Aus tiefem Riss schaut alles Geld. Eine Glocke aus Glas bin ich weg.
That there are other worlds in other regions, as well as different races of men and breeds of wild beasts, until nature, the perfecting and creative mother of things, has led all to the final limit of growth. Now, in no way must it be thought to be like the truth. Now, it must be admitted that there are other worlds in other regions, as well as different races of men and breeds of wild beasts, until nature, the perfecting and creative mother of things, has led all to the final limit of growth. It must be admitted that there are other worlds in other regions, as well as different races of men and breeds of wild beasts, until nature, the perfecting and creative mother of things, has led all to the final limit of growth. It must be admitted that there are other worlds in other regions, as well as different races of men and breeds of wild beasts, until nature, the perfecting and creative mother of things. Now, in no way must it be thought to be like the truth.
Octopussy riffs on the question of creation and the role of genitalia. The great thing about Octopussy's consciousness on this and other creation myths was that it's alive.
Since everywhere infinite space lies empty, and seeds, numberless in their number, in the totality of the heavenly depths, fly around in many ways, driven on by eternal motion. Wherefore, again and again, it is necessary to admit that there are other directions of matter in other locations like the one here, which the ether holds in its greedy embrace. It must be admitted that there are other worlds in other regions, as well as different races of men and breeds of wild beasts, until nature, the perfect, until nature, the perfect, until nature, until nature, until nature, until nature, the perfecting and creative mother of things, has led all to the final limit of growth. Here, development ought to stop for all things. Here, nature forcefully reins in growth. All things gradually waste away and go to the grave, exhausted by the long space of time, by the long space of time. So too, therefore, will the walls of the wide world be assailed on all sides and sink into crumbling ruins.
Nothing is enough for a man to whom enough is too little. I take the liberty to start with this quotation by Epicurus, as I'd like to share
Octopussy riffs on the question of creation and the role of genitalia. The great thing about Octopussy's consciousness on this and other creation myths was that it's a Octopussy encounters deep learning and the importance of the game. In the manifest fullness of those oddly cathected rhythm beat hums and strategically played
Yeah, 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 yeah. Do, 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 do.
and what did Octopussy do? Octopussy laughs. Of course, this was no ordinary laugh, at least not one emanating from some kind of superficial joke.
It is a joy to approach pure springs and to drink from them. And it is a joy to pick new flowers and to seek a glorious crown for my head from that place where the muses never yet have on a mortal's head a garland set. Because I am teaching about great things and try to free men's mind from the narrow bonds of religion. Nothing ever comes to be from nothing through divine intervention, for certainly not by design did the first beginnings of things arrange themselves in their order. With keen intent, nor surely did they reach an agreement about what motions each would take. Since many of them are moved in many ways throughout the universe, and from endless time are stirred up and excited by collisions. By trying motions and unions of every kind, they finally arrive at arrangements which produce and maintain the sum of things. And with whatever motions the first beginnings now move, they moved with the same motions in ages past, and in the future will always be carried along in a similar way. And they will arise under the same conditions, and will exist and grow and flourish in their strength, in so far as it is granted to each through the laws of nature. It is a joy to approach pure springs and to drink from them. And it is a joy to pick new flowers and to seek a glorious crown for my head from that place where the muses never yet have on a mortal's head a garland set. Because I am teaching about great things and try to free men's mind from the narrow bonds of religion. Nothing ever comes to be from nothing through divine intervention, for certainly not by design did the first beginnings of things arrange themselves in their order.
Okay.
With keen intent, nor surely did they reach an agreement about what motions each would take. Since many of them are moved in many ways throughout the universe, and from endless time are stirred up and excited by collisions. By trying motions and unions of every kind, they finally arrive at arrangements which produce and maintain the sum of things. And with whatever motions the first beginnings now move, they moved with the same motions in ages past.
Wait, but which one? We haven't started yet properly, right? We haven't started yet properly, right?
No, we haven't.
Okay.
It's Sylvia
Who started? Okay.
And in the future will always be carried along in a similar way. And they will arise under the same conditions. And will exist and grow and flourish in their strength.
Ja, jetzt spreche
In
ich.
so
Ja.
far as it is
Und
granted
hört man mich? Ja, jetzt hört man mich. Gell?
through the
Ja.
laws of
Gut.
nature.
Ob es gut ist, weiß ich nicht. Gell?
Gedreht? Jetzt ist es aufgedreht. Hast du schon eingestellt? Okay.
It is a joy to approach.
Willkommen. Oh, das ist zu laut.
It is a joy to approach pure
Willkommen.
springs and to drink
Willkommen.
from them.
Einen schönen guten Abend. Willkommen. Ja.
kann ich nichts mehr geheim sagen. Aber in welcher Lautstärke spricht man? Und wo bin ich?
Ist der Maya?
Hm?
Ist der Maya in Kinshasa,
Ja.
der zugeschaltet wird?
Ja. Willkommen bei Planetary Skins. Wir befinden uns hier in einer Teststation, einem Prototyp, in dem wir uns mit der Materialität des virtuellen und physischen Realen beschäftigten, um so einen Imaginations- und Verhandlungsraum aufzufalten. Planetary Skins ist wie eine osmotische Haut, in der das Virtuelle zur Membran zwischen physischen Orten und virtuellem Raum wird. Es geht uns nicht um Simulation von Realität, ganz im Gegenteil. Die Virtualität, wie wir sie verstehen, verbindet Mitwirkende aus unterschiedlichen Weltteilen miteinander und bringt reale Ambivalenzen, Konflikte und Potenziale in Resonanz. Es geht uns auch nicht darum, Bewusstsein zu schaffen über die ökologische Situationen oder über politische Problemzonen. Wir wissen alle Bescheid. Was wir vielmehr brauchen, sind Werkzeuge und mehr noch die Fähigkeit zu handeln, das, was man Agency nennt. Agency bezeichnet James Bridle als das Gefühl, die Kontrolle über sein eigenes Leben zu haben und Schritte zur Veränderung ergreifen zu können und damit auch unsere Welt zu gestalten. Der Verlust von Handlungsmacht bzw. auch das Gefühl des Verlustes verhindert hingegen, dass wir neue Vorstellungen und Verhaltensweisen entwickeln und ausprobieren. Das ist das Trauma, das nicht nur Einzelne, sondern ganze Gesellschaften erfasst hat. Unter Agency kann man auch die bewusste Wahrnehmung verstehen, dass man alles lernen kann. Wenn man weiß, dass man sich Dinge aneignen kann, kann man sie auch angehen. Und man ist in der Lage, Vorstellungen zu entwickeln und sich nicht entmutigen zu lassen, wenn diese als utopisch, als Fantasiegebilde oder Fabulationen abgetan werden. Über 3 Kontinente hinweg werden Künstlerinnen, Philosophinnen, Wissenschaftlerinnen fabulieren. Sie werden uns künstlerische Imaginationen, Wortbilder, wissenschaftliche Erkenntnisse oder unterschiedliche Geisteswelten näher bringen. Auch wenn sie aus unterschiedlichen Welten stammen und sich verschiedenster Realitätskonzepte bedienen, was sie verbindet, ist, dass sie über die Möglichkeit einer Welt in Vielfalt sprechen. Diese organischen Netze, die man als Omentum bezeichnet, sind intelligente Membrane, die eine wichtige Funktion im Immunsystem haben. Ähnliche Membrane entstehen, weil sie sich auf vielfältige Art und Weise als praktisch und als erfolgreich erweisen. Muster wiederholen sich, ziehen sich durch den gesamten Naturzusammenhang, von den kleinsten Mikroorganismen über Pilzmyzelien bis zum Gehirn und auch zur kosmischen Supernova. Planetary Skins ist eine osmotische Haut, in der das Virtuelle zur Membran mutiert, um eine gleichzeitige Präsenz im physischen und virtuellen Raum zu ermöglichen. Technologie dient uns dazu, über Raum- und Zeitzonen hinweg gemeinsam über Synergien nachzudenken und Ideen auszutauschen, um die Welt mit der Evolutionsbiologin Lynn Margulis als Organismus zu betrachten, als ein System von einfachen und komplexen Organismen, die nicht völlig voneinander abgrenzbar sind und die durch Myriaden verknüpfter, kommunizierender Schichten in enger, oft symbiotischer Beziehung stehen. Und der Mensch ist Teil davon. Dieser Ansatz kann uns zu einer neuen Agency führen, einer Agency, die von der Wirkmacht der Natur lernt und sich mit ihr verbündet, um einen obsolet gewordenen Humanismus hinter sich zu lassen und Diversität als Vielfalt und Reichtum der Natur zu feiern.
Cosmos does not refer to outer space, but on the contrary to locality, says the philosopher Yu Hui. The widest expanse of the universal contracted into tiny space. What does Yu Hui allude to? His idea of cosmos is different from the Euromodern perspective. We always observe cosmos from a particular angle, a particular locality, Yu Hui argues. Cosmos is multiplicity, not singularity. What if there were other images and tales of cosmos beyond the imagination of the Western scientific narrative? At this point, speculation begins. We don't know where it will take us, but that is the fun part of it. It taps into contingent stories and evidence of the past and will ultimately reshape how we perceive the world in the future. Surprising and sometimes alien, cosmos emerges in diverse conceptions of earth and birth, continuation and dissipations, being and flesh and other matter. Denser or looser, entangled matter it is always. To do this, we need a different mode of sensing and sense-making, a new kind of speculative agency. Shall we call it a re-entanglement, for lack of a better word? Not that we have become untangled, quite the contrary. Increasingly, we become aware of our impact on nature and the web of life. Sylvia Wynter calls it our environment in common, even though we treat it in the most uncommon of ways, due to the exploitation, havoc, and annihilation we humans, and mainly humans from the West, have brought to many worlds and beings, including myriad humans for centuries. What you see around you in the physical space of the gallery, as well as the virtual space from which I'm speaking to you, is our prototype of an exploration into speculative agency, to Yu Hui's insight of a cosmos that refers to locality. We now add that cosmos always speaks of the sheer abundance of entangled diversity. Can we partake in, or even better, can we re-entangle with its magic by grasping the virtual as a membrane, as a connective tissue for the myriad webs of life we inhabit? Our planetary skins, because cosmos is everywhere and everywhere slightly differently.
The 1st century BCE Roman poet Lucretius sang that matter continually swerved at indeterminate times and indeterminate places. Several quantum physicists have now recognized Lucretius as the first philosopher of what we now call quantum indeterminacy. The idea is that the movement of matter cannot be fully determined. It has a kind of irreducible agency which continually weaves and unweaves the visible universe around us. For Lucretius, nothing is static. Everything is migrant and mutational. To live well is not to fear death or seek immortality outside nature, but to savor a life in motion on its way toward cosmic dissipation.
To approach. It is a joy to approach pure springs and to drink from them. And it is a joy to pick new flowers and to seek a glorious crown for my head from that place where the muses never yet have on a mortal's head a garland set. Because I am teaching about great things and try to free men's mind from the narrow bonds of religion. Nothing ever comes to be from nothing through divine intervention, for certainly not by design did the first beginnings of things arrange themselves in their order with keen intent, nor surely did they reach an agreement about what motions each would take. Since many of them are moved in many ways throughout the universe, and from endless time are stirred up and excited by collisions. By trying motions and unions of every kind, they finally arrive at arrangements which produce and maintain the sum of things. And with whatever motions the first beginnings now move, they moved with the same motions in ages past, and in the future will always be carried along in a similar way, and they will arise under the same conditions, and will exist and grow and flourish in their strength, in so far as it is granted to each through the laws of nature.
Wir leben auf einer dünnen, steinigen Kruste, die wir unsere Heimat nennen. Aber das ist nur die Oberfläche allen Lebens. Das große Ganze fließt im Untergrund und gehorcht anderen Zeitdimensionen als dem menschlichen Augenblick. Was wir als Erde bewohnen, ist die Akne, der Auswurf und das Exkrement tiefer Prozesse. Die Haut der Erde ist die Lithosphäre, die harte Erdkruste, über die sich zwiebelartig flüssige und gasförmige Sphären schichten. Wir treffen uns heute in der Atmosphäre, in der Dampf- und Gashülle metabolischer Darmwände, in der photosynthetischen Ausdünstung des Planktons, im Dunstschweiß und Mundgeruch des Lebens. Alles zusammen nannte der Philosoph Stephen Pearl Andrews im 19. Jahrhundert Geosphäre. Sie reicht vom Lichtblau des Himmels bis ins hellen Schwarz der Erdkruste. Dass die Geosphäre nur zum Teil anorganischen oder vulkanischen Ursprungs und großteils Produkt lebendiger Prozesse ist, bemerkte Andrews Zeitgenosse, der Geologe Edward Suess, der die Geosphäre erstmals als Biosphäre beschrieb. Wenig später definierte der Geowissenschaftler Wladimir Vernadsky die Erdkruste als globales Ökosystem im Sinne einer Global Skin, einer belebten Haut. Geologie und Biologie verschmelzen zur Geobiologie und begründen Vorstellungen wie jene der Gaia-Hypothese oder des Raumschiffs Erde. Vernadsky erkannte, dass Gestein, das heißt die Lithosphäre, Ausdruck des Lebendigen sind. Selbst Granit wird unter Druck durchlässig wie ein Schwamm und wird besiedelt von Mikroben. Und Wernatzky erkannte, dass spätestens mit der industriellen Transformation die Menschheit Teil der Geologie geworden ist, indem sie in Summe mehr Erdmasse bewegt als alle Vorgänge in der nichtmenschlichen Biosphäre zusammen. Wernatzky nannte diese technokulturelle Sphäre in Vorausschau auf das heutige Anthropozän Noosphäre. Diese Sphäre des menschlichen Verstandes verwandelt die Lithosphäre in Beton und Städte, baut elektronische Netzwerke aus Silizium und spannt eine Infosphäre als digitale Haut über den Planeten. Aber die größte Datendichte der Biodiversität herrscht dennoch im Hades, im Dunkel der Lithosphäre. Rund 70% aller Archeen und Bakterien leben nicht im Himmel und in sonnengefluteten Paradiesgärten, sondern in der Hölle, in und unter der Oberhaut der Erde. Die Vielfalt des Lebens hat ihren Ursprung nicht an der Oberfläche, vielmehr wächst sie in den tiefen Poren der globalen Haut.
Nothing is enough for a man to whom enough is too little. I take the liberty to start with this quotation by Epicurus, as I'd like to share a little bit about nothing. It is quite fascinating to recollect what astrophysicists have found out about the universe. As it appears, there are galaxies and stars and black holes, so regions that are densely filled with matter. But also, there are regions of space that are not occupied by material bodies, be it in the vastness of cosmological space or in chambers purposefully designed for it. And in this sense, the vacuum or the void does exist. This statement seems rather non-controversial for us today, but historically this was fiercely debated. However, the vacuum appears not to be completely empty. As quantum field theory suggests, supposedly inevitable quantum vacuum fluctuations fundamentally undo mere nothingness. And although these quantum vacuum fluctuations do not materialize, they have physical consequences, as experiments show. On a cosmological scale, space devoid of matter appears to govern the accelerating expansion of the universe. Consequently, it affects both the evolution as well as the end of the cosmos. Needless to say that nothing really matters.
Octopussy riffs on the question of creation and the role of genitalia. The great thing about Octopussy's consciousness on this and other creation myths was that its aliveness to the great out there seemed to come alive precisely in the stretch time of the classical modernist 4 minutes and 33-second symphonic movement of silence. Her inhabiting of this strange kind of silence, the silence of emergence, the silence of wondering, the silence of wandering, floating around and riffing on the riffs, not only enabled a whole series of mad, wild forms of imaginative concertos in 8-part harmony, 9 if one counted the eye-brain blobhead, if and when one might enter the make-it-up-as-you-go-along listening fray, but also encouraged a profound set of yearnings for soaking up the wet of pleasure, decadence, mutation, and slime. Oh, what the hell, would sing Octopussy to the water gods, with his 8 arms dancing a rumba come improv, the ensuing accidental and dizzying encounters produced, perhaps not unsurprisingly, specialized fractals of sense and sensation, elegant, electrified currents, and slices of electrified, elegant currents, stretching out in all directions at once. Their colorful vibrations, shape-shifting between and among sound and image, wave, light bundle, and dot, simultaneously releasing multiple dimensionalities of octopussified serotonin, dreamscape, tsunami diptychs, and perhaps even a speed series game of Go.
Connect the world osmotically throughout the Earth's biospheres, filled with ambivalence, conflict, and potentials. Matter inhabits time multidimensionally, and in a plurality of space, it permeates all scales, from the invisible realms of quantum particles, molecular assemblages, and microorganisms, to the unfathomable stretches of stars, galaxies, and space-time, to the dwindling world we live in now and here. The agency of cosmos is to create and be created. Dimensions abound everywhere things happen. Reality is sheer abundance. Still, in futile attempts, we deprive ourselves of its wonders. We make it scarce in order to control it, feed off of it, and feel safe. But the safety that lies in fear and anxiety is a miserable illusion. There are always risks, better or worse ones. We've all experienced it.
Fabulation 1. Excuse me, is this the metaverse? I need a break and open the New Yorker app. It says the metaverse is here, or that it might actually never come. The article is not really sure. I wonder where here is and what it means that it might never come. I have a hitch that it has been here for a while, and that it is not happening on the other side of the computer screen but in the middle of what we commonly call reality. Looking out over the trees, lawns, and ponds of the Kinshasa golf course, the red clay of the tennis courts, the mint apricot striped new Matrix shopping mall, a purple piece of tarp waving down its right side like the flag of some monochrome country, and the small red, white, and blue graveyard right in front of it onto the stretch of water where the Congo River opens up into Pool Malebo. I wonder whether there has ever been a time in which science was this fueled by fiction. Contemporary technology that boosted by the imaginations of the previous century, in our case, 20th century books, films, and philosophy. Today, those imaginations return to haunt us as consumer products, deprived of their critical, subversive, utopian potentials, commodified into a duller version of the fantasies originally trimmed up in the collective imaginary. Colourful plastic debris on the garbage heap that is reality. The New Yorker tells me that Microsoft has recently bought the computer game company Activision to furnish the vast realms of the coming or upcoming metaverse. When Neil Stephenson popularized the notion of the metaverse in his 1990s novel Snow Crash, he probably did not imagine technology companies actually throwing billions of dollars at the realization of this imaginary three-dimensional virtual space. Even though he once wrote that he coined the term as a PR gag for his book, just as he did with Avatar. If an imaginary virtual space becomes a real virtual space, where's the difference? First of all, when this fantastic abstract meta space leaves the book covers and enters computer code, it will turn from a fiction into a simulation, which probably means that it exists no longer inside of you, but you exist inside of it. Simulations aim to be indistinguishable from, where fictions, by definition, set themselves apart from reality. In a world that increasingly coincides with simulation models that constantly predict, calculate, and regulate it, could fiction, in its old-fashioned insistence not to be real, in its persistence on a scene that tells it apart from reality, become a contemporary mode of critique? Maybe I'm also taking this too far. At the end of the day, this is about business. To have an in-house imagination factory customizing the fictional potentials and desires that fuel the future innovations of your technology company brings closure to a productive loop. It turns the cybernetic lesson that feedback loops enable both transgression and control, depending on whether positive or negative feedback govern within a recursive system, into a business model. And anyway, fiction is never innocent. It shapes fantasy and imagination. In their often violent desire, their technological capability to become real, European regimes of fantasy and imagination have shaped the world like probably no other force in the history of mankind, colonialism being one extreme of this ongoing expansion and design process that reshapes whatever it finds into whatever it believes it has found or was looking for. So where does that leave our notion of fiction as contemporary form of critique in times of simulation?
Ob wir uns nun in Kinshasa befinden, so wie Marian, der gerade gesprochen hat, oder hier in Innsbruck in Tirol, was uns alle verbindet, ist die planetare Haut über uns. Es ist keine Grenze, es ist etwas völlig Durchlässiges. Es ist unsere Atmosphäre. und sie beträgt nur weniger als 1% des Erdradius. Von hier bis zum Mittelpunkt der Erde sind es nämlich über 6700 Kilometer. Die verschiedenen Sphären dieser Atmosphäre, unserer Atmosphäre, reichen ungefähr bis zu 50 Kilometer über uns. Dann beginnt sozusagen das All, das obere Ende der Stratosphäre ist dort. Und das ist überhaupt nicht weit, das ist von hier, von Innsbruck bis nach Imst. So weit ist es bis zum All. Joseph Kittinger, ein US-amerikanischer Fallschirmjäger, hat 1960 den Weltrekord gebrochen, als er von 31 Kilometern Höhe aus seiner Gondel Excelsior gesprungen ist. Über ihm das schwarze All, die Sterne, und er ist sozusagen dann gegen die Erde gefallen. 4,5 Minuten war er im freien Fall. Und er erinnert sich, in diesen 4,5 Minuten hatte er überhaupt kein Gefühl des Fallens. Er sagt, ich drehte mich auf den Rücken und schaute nach oben und sah den Ballon zum Himmel rasen. Also in 30 Kilometern Höhe hat sich Joe Kittinger auf den Rücken gedreht, hat sich wie als wäre es sozusagen eine richtige Materie auf die Luft gelegt, auf die Atmosphäre gelegt und nach oben geschaut und seiner Gondel beim Entgleiten ins All zugeschaut. Er fällt mit Schallgeschwindigkeit, aber er hat überhaupt kein Gefühl des Sinkens, des Fallens. Er fühlt sich schwebend, er fühlt sich in der Luft so, als würde er nach oben fallen. Und das ist ein bisschen so wie Thales von Milet, der gesagt hat, in Realität leben wir nicht auf einer Schicht aus Erde, sondern wir leben am Grund eines Ozeans aus Luft. In diesem schwebte Kittinger. Und das wiederum erinnert mich an eine Episode aus Stephen Baxters Buch Evolution, in dem er spekulative Momente der Menschheit, sozusagen von der Dinosaurierzeit bis in die ferne Zukunft mit wissenschaftlichen Gegebenheiten vermischt. Und er beschreibt eine Art von Pterosaurier, Flugsaurier mit filigranen Flügeln, die eine Spannweite über 100 Metern gehabt haben sollen und die in der Stratosphäre gelebt haben, also in dieser Höhe, in der Kittinger aus seiner Gondel gesprungen ist. Dieser Luftwal, der in Dinosaurierzeiten gelebt haben könnte, schaufelte beständig Plankton und Insekten und Spinnen in sein Maul, die irgendwie in diese Höhe getragen wurden, und er konnte immer die Krümmung der Erde sehen. Und wie ein Satellit umrundete er eben täglich die Erde.
What I imagined was going to be a play in 4 acts. The first act would be optics, an infinite tasks constitution. The second act would be stanza, the work's self-collection phase. The third act would be camera, the task's ordinary dwelling. The fourth act would be amidst the planetary blast. But rather than performing the play itself, I would like to talk about how to fabulate, if something like this should be the project. So fabulation is the first key term I would like to introduce by a citation from René Descartes. He says, the fable is the inaugurating, regulated and regulating motion of the mind that would imagine the world to have regularity. This is somewhat surprising for our reception of Descartes today because we know him as a mechanist and as an analytical philosopher. But the notion of mécané that he at his time was still involved with literally meant to be resourceful. The term itself comes from copiousness, from drawing of the plenty. And hence, the ideas that Descartes advances here say that it's a regularity that the imagination perceives via fabulation by putting cognition in a particular kind of touch with the sensory organs. For Descartes, literally, he says the imagination imagines the imaginable in imagining the unimaginable.
Change is urgent, and we know it. But is it about reorientation, as we are often reassured? A new renaissance, a new enlightenment? Won't it just keep us on track of modernity, this colonizing worldview that projects itself onto quantifiable space? Won't it just feed our imagination with small adjustments and nicer behavior while we stick to well-worn trails? There is urgency to finally emancipate from all these outdated concepts and the violence they are still provoking. Shouldn't we instead listen closely to those more chthonic cosmic poets and makers arriving from the human as well as more than human worlds? Those who appreciate the wild and the chaotic, the turbulent and contingent, the alterity within entangled relations. Those who embrace raw matter as ever-changing emergence and engage in non-adaptation to the technologies of ideology and foundational ideals. Those whose debt to the earth, the air, and all that lives have taught them how entangled as matter we all are, coexisting with everything alive. Don't these voices, these new ancients claim, at last, a pluriform counter-cosmology in which co-presence resolves the institutions of self-referentiality in the immanence of being as love?
Octopussy encounters deep learning and the importance of the game. In the manifest fullness of those oddly cathected rhythm beat hums and strategically placed double convex bursts of sound, wave, and vibration, Octopussy begins to find themselves playing a game. It is an odd sort of game, deeply strategic, achingly complex, but with a kind of compelling, mean-spirited attraction impossible to ignore. She chooses black. Their opponent, cleverly disguised as dead fish, assumes white. The game begins. As Octopussy takes a moment to consider his next move, suddenly Shit's vagina, mouth, phallus, testes apprehends the maggotry of this entire composition, the maggotry of calculated probabilities gone deep and wide, albeit scattered across the surface of a 40 by 40 centimeter Shinkaya replicated board via white pellets and the genius so-called of its machinic master, AlphaGo, or maybe even AlphaGod. Dead fish drops its pellet at an intersection Octopussy had not had a minute to contemplate, build, or protect. The sucker on her furthest and longest tentacle tries to reconstruct the path to this bloated elsewhere nothingnesses instant move made by dead fish, this strategic fold of hell writ large, but nothing adds up. All initial moves have long since metastasized into strange morphogenic encounters with no arrows of time, save for the pretense of a vector that can only venture forward or, more likely, given Octopussy's pellets, now surrounded by alpha fish neural networks of seizure and control, of stopping altogether. As the tentacles dance this way and that around the coral multitudes, around the wet solitudes of oceanic flotsam and quill, as she contemplates her next move while simultaneously on the move, surrounded as he is by the murderous, intoxicating conundrums of this ancient game, she realizes there is no move. Defeat is imminent. Resigning to this strangely attractive elsewhere set of nothingnesses, devoid as it seems to be of even the most basic garden variety sensualities of seaweed, coral, blood, starfish, and dirt, Octopussy learns a feeling not heretofore encountered: loneliness. Not quite the siren song he long ago imagined, one that would orgasmically suck her onto the rocks and pierce all her genital armpit mouths with the glory of burning ice. No, this neural network raconteur, cleverly disguised as an AlphaGo deadfish, was only capable of offering sterilized textbook intelligences. The failed promise of a cut and thrust to come, Octopussy found himself drained, empty, bored, strangely disfigured. It was not just sour grapes at having lost, though this clearly did have a small sting that was left in her tail. It was that despite a myriad strategy and feedback loops on offer, the game seemed so cleanly single-minded, a bit anal retentive. In the olden days, she clocked, the end goal was the mid-goal in the process of becoming goal. But these days, the end goal was just the win, like coloring within the lines and calling it art.
Since you cannot see the first beginnings of things with your eyes, let me remind you, besides, that there are bodies which, you must admit, exist in things and yet are not able to be seen. Therefore, there exists intangible space, void, and emptiness. If void did not exist, there is no way. If void did not exist, there is no way things would be able to move. For that which is the natural role of corporis, to roll, impede, and obstruct, would be present at all times for all things, and therefore nothing would be able to move forward, because nothing would yield a place from where to start. Therefore, either all bodies must be deprived of motion, or it must be admitted that void is mixed in things, and from this source, each thing takes its first beginning of each thing takes its first beginning of motion. Each thing takes its first beginning of motion. And since void is present in created things, it must be that solid matter exists around it. The first beginnings in creating things must of necessity possess a secret and invisible nature, so that nothing would fight against and hinder whatever is created from being able to exist with its own character. For sky, sea, earth, rivers, and sun are composed of the same things, and so too are crops, trees, and animals. But they are mixed with different things and moved in different ways.
menschliche Mikrobiom ist die Gesamtheit allen mikrobischen Lebens, das sich in menschlichen Geweben und Flüssigkeiten befindet. An vielen Stellen des menschlichen Körpers kann man Mikroben finden, beispielsweise im Magen-Darm-Trakt, auf der Haut, und es tummeln sich in uns und um uns herum Milliarden von Mikroben, ungefähr so viele, wie es menschliche Zellen gibt. Das heißt, wir glauben immer, das ist alles ganz scharf abgegrenzt, aber in Wirklichkeit ist alles unscharf und durchlässig. Und wir als Menschen sind gigantische Planeten für Mikroben. Mikroben können unter extremsten Bedingungen leben. Sie können sogar auf der Außenseite des Space Shuttles ins All fliegen und lebend wieder zurückkehren. In der weltraumähnlichsten Umwelt auf der Erde, in der Antarktis, kann man irrsinnig viele Meteoriten finden, die von fernen Planeten stammen. Und 1984 wurde hier in den Allen Hills der ALH, Allen Hill 8401 Meteorit entdeckt. Und dieser Stein, hat man festgestellt, ist 4 Milliarden Jahre alt. Und damals, zu dieser Zeit, kommt vom Mars, gab es noch flüssiges Wasser am Mars. Und man dachte, und deshalb war das so eine Besonderheit und wurde weltbekannt, dass in diesem Stein, dass man nachweisen konnte, dass man mikrobisches Leben gefunden hat. Leider musste das dann später revidiert werden.
Tiefer als der Tag gedacht, tiefer als der Tag gedacht, ist das Leben an sich. Das himmlische Leben ist photoautotroph, es nährt sich von Sonnenlicht, aber es gibt noch eine andere Art der Autotrophie in der dunklen Unterwelt, die Chemolithoautotrophie. Sie bildet die Schattenseite des Lebens. Die ältesten Lebensformen sind chemolithoautotrophe Archeen und Bakterien, die sich von Steinen und Mineralien nähern. Und diese chemolithotrophen, wörtlich steinessenden Organismen stellen die herkömmliche Biologie auf den Kopf. Ohne Sonnenlicht, ohne Photosynthese beziehen sie ihre Energie aus anorganischen Verbindungen, aus Eisen, Mangan, Uran, Arsen oder Schwefel. Ein gutes Drittel der gesamten Biomasse des Lebens steckt mutmaßlich in der Erdkruste. Und diese Mikroben gelten unter Astrobiologen als wahrscheinlichste Lebensform auf fremden Planeten. Metaphorisch gesprochen begegnen wir in der Hölle nicht dem Teufel, sondern Aliens, mikroskopisch kleinen Außerirdischen.
How to think of such a place where we are as if dead, where it should be possible to ideate mathematically. We can refer to the genre of tableau vivant, of a kind of a reenactment of scenes, and the way I would like to address them is not through painting, but through the active practice of cosmic pantomime. Key for this is the figure of the chiasm. The chiasm was especially used by Blaise Pascal, a 17th century mathematician and mystic, we must say, as a rhetorical figure of thought in order to address identities that are of a polar nature, like true and false, in a mechanical, cunning, mathematical thinking kind of way. The chiasm, He said ties 4 terms, 2 by 2, in one order, and then also in the reverse order. Examples he gives of this are, for example, these. The spaces that I ignore and that ignore me. The heart has its reasons that reason does not know. By space, the universe comprehends, understands me, and engulfs me. By thought, I understand it. Or a last one, to make the small things as the great, and the great as the small and easy. In his thinking, there was one figure, the chiasm of chiasms, we could say, which grasps the scope of this kind of thinking, which is why I call it a cosmic pantomime. He says, equally incapable of seeing the nothingness from which one is drawn and the infinity where one is swallowed up, what will one do then, if not to perceive some appearance in the middle of things, in their eternal despair of knowing neither the principle nor their end? It is not a definition of the Christian faith that Pascal gives here. It is a definition of tragedy, of literature, rather. Every word counts in it. Nothingness, infinity, appearance, middle, case, despair. Every image has weight. Pull, swallow, see, glimpse, know. Nouns and verbs are inseparable as skin and flesh, articulated as the different parts of a skeleton. Pascal's thought dwells in doubt, such as to welcome fineness and neatness of tabulations that have to come to terms with one particular constraint: nothing too much and nothing missing.
No essence, no God, no deities, uniquantum indeterminasti. History, order, and habits arise. History, order, and habits arise. History, order, and habits arise from spontaneous works, spontaneous works, spontaneous works. Fold up and vanish below the surface of presence, presence, presence. Saturated, fold up and vanish below the surface of presence. As to all things, as to all things, as to all things, as to all things, as to all, 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 as to all things, as to all, 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 as to all things. Masters?
Tabulation 2. Sorry, is this a virtual image? Looking back at my computer screen, a photo of Christ in thick woolen clothes on an ice-bound lake somewhere near Stuttgart, a blow-up plastic palm tree in his hand in front of me, I wonder whether there are fictional potentials that cannot simply be realized through the investment of sufficient funds by large-scale enterprises. At least not without a resistant rest, a useless, fantastic leftover that can't be easily commodified. As we've known for a while that resistance is futile in our coded capitalist algorithmic future, the only chance might be to dive head-on into the recursive cycle, to become loopy. So how do you become loopy in the metaverse? I remember that Lydia told me that the onlookers outside of the picture's frame couldn't stop laughing about a black person with a palm tree on ice. They probably felt that the actors and the location somehow did not fit together. The image of Christ walking on frozen water challenges its viewers to obey the order of territory and positionality, who belongs where and who doesn't, and to laugh over the apparent breach of its boundaries. More slapstick-minded spectators might even be tempted to look for cracks in the fine crust. The picture turns a real space into a fictional space by introducing a real person and a real object into a documentary situation, Christ in Germany. So is this a virtual image as opposed to a merely digital one? Why would one call a digital image virtual anyway? Outside, the wind is picked up. The sky turns dark yellow. A beautiful red streak colored by the fumes of burning plastic and the exhaust of millions of cars hovers over the Congo River behind the square Florida-colored Plattenbauten our Lebanese landlord has erected his real estate empire on. If the electric cars that are the hype in Europe ever make it back to the place where the minerals that run their batteries are being dug up, those beautiful gaslit Kinshasa skies will disappear, like the famous sunsets in the French Provence that died with the German coal industry in the Ruhrgebiet. A romantic red sky simply needs a sufficient amount of particles to refract the light. When a Chinese roadwork corporation recently started building overpasses to ease Kinshasa traffic at its most crowded crossings, they had to strip up to 9 meters of soil before they hit stable grounds, uninfused with plastic fossils. Those archaeological remnants of northern industrial capitalism now piling up in simmering roadside heaps, their fumes tinting local skies blood red. That is another extremely productive loop, but less ephemeral than electronic feedback systems. Raw matter in changing states, radically connected over time and space. Extractive forces digging up prehistoric beings and mythical creatures that have slowly rotted into fossil fuels over millennia, burning them or hardening them into colorful plastic forms to be sent out over the planet to be burned a little later somewhere else, dissolving into colorful skies or to return into the ground in places they were first dug up from to be unearthed yet again by a Chinese roadwork company and underpaid Congolese workers under most horrible conditions they for sure did not create. You can't make this shit up. This is reality, I guess. And unfortunately, the virtuality of this reality has not taken away any of its realness. That is, if we don't mistake virtuality for something happening in some ominous digital sphere behind the screen of some electronic gadget separated from our real world. I hit Command Space and type in fabulation, a text by Daniel Coluccello Barber. Quote, however, one resists this fiction not by casting one's lot with the real, since the real, at least when it's defined in a stark opposition to the fictive, is the effect of a presumed fiction, and one frees the real from the pre-established fiction.
The first beginnings will rock with rolling laughter. Howl aloud, and with salty tears drench their faces and cheeks. For gaze closely, whenever the rays of the sun enter and pour their light through the dark places of houses, you will see many minute corpora, mixed in many ways through empty space in the very light of the rays, as if in an unending struggle giving rise to battles and fights and never taking a rest. They are driven on by their frequent meetings and partings. But the primary corpora, which exist in their solid simplex, when they travel through the empty void and nothing delays them, and they, forming a unity from their own parts, forming a unity from their own parts, are carried along in haste in the one direction in which they began to move. They ought, of course, surpass in speed and be carried along much more quickly than the light of the sun, and cover many times the extent of space in the same time in which the flashing light of the sun spreads across the sky.
Everything is in motion, from the ongoing expansion of the universe, with its innumerable galaxies whirling around supermassive black holes, to the Earth's revolution around the sun. We know of nothing in our vast cosmos that is entirely static. Even at the tiniest subatomic levels, there are indeterminate fluctuations of energy that never stop moving. Physicists call them quantum fluctuations. But what is movement? The most common definition is that movement occurs when something moves from one point to another in space and time. But what if space and time are also moving outward in all directions as the universe expands? What if the fabric of space-time itself is woven from the same energetic fluctuations as the universe? It means that there are no fixed points in space or time, and that the entire cosmos is continually changing. It also means that movement is only relative to other movements, and not to any fixed points in space or time. But if everything is in motion, why do things seem relatively stable? Why do we think of movement as going from one point to another? The answer takes us all the way back to the beginning of the universe. Our universe began as a hot and dense region of space-time 13.8 billion years ago that has been spreading out and cooling ever since. This is what physicists call entropy. As the cosmos spreads out, higher energy concentrations slowly dissolve and mix like tendrils of cream in coffee until everything is thoroughly mixed. This process of spreading out creates patterns, such as stars and spiral galaxies, that persist and dissipate their energy as long as they have enough fuel. Just like an eddy of water spiraling down your bathtub drain or a living organism, when they run out of energy, their forms dissolve. Scientists call these metastable states. At every scale of reality, energy flows and matter cycles back and forth. Solids vibrate slowly and close together, liquids vibrate faster and farther apart, and gases even more. Why is this so important? While many people, including philosophers, tend to think of reality as made of discrete things and people. But there are no things or people. There are only processes and patterns in motion. Nouns are conceptual shortcuts for movements. They are abstractions that help us wash the dishes and build skyscrapers. People and things are only the tip of nature's iceberg. Instead of looking at the world through the pinhole of discrete things, what if we focused on the movements and processes? This could have implications across scales. Perhaps it could even help us avoid a few problems. For instance, ecological systems are not made of discrete plants, animals, and resources. They are vast webs of interconnected processes. When people destroy one part of an ecological process, it can negatively affect the whole system in unpredictable ways. By not taking the entangled movement of metastable ecology seriously, various groups of people have inadvertently hastened mass extinction and climate change. Similarly, societies are not made of discrete people. When one part of a social process is damaged by social and economic inequality, the effects ripple through the whole system of social circulation like a wave. For instance, global economic inequality creates patterns of migration that make wealthy countries richer by taking workers away from poorer countries. Borders are violent and failing attempts to control the consequences of not taking inequality and mobility and social feedback loops seriously. Each person is also a process. We consume energy, circulate it through our bodies, and release it. Our brains and nervous systems use this energy to continually rewire themselves in a process scientists call neuroplasticity. People are not one-dimensional characters with immutable identities. We are works in progress, continually experimenting with different ways of being. When we treat people like discrete and inflexible individuals, or when others treat us this way, it can create psychological distress and illness. But what else are we missing by using conceptual shortcuts without paying attention to the processes underneath them? What if we thought of the world as processes and patterns in motion instead of thinking about people and things? It might just change everything.
Don't we need a different approach to technology and the digital too? One that counters the techno-capitalist fantasies of the metaverse and other predictive simulations that only produce extractive asymmetries and biases and widen the gap between the rich and the poor, exploit divisive politics and reinsert reactionary norms of class, race, and gender, prejudices we need to overcome. There is much to regret, and it seems much to be infuriated about. Rage is growing everywhere, but giving yourself over to the death drive, to hate and exclusion, to destruction and war won't help. There's no way out. We are too deeply entangled in nature's relational processes to free ourselves and do as we please, whatever that would even mean. But there are ways in. There are many forms of sensing and sense-making. We only need to evoke the diversity of practices, ancient or indigenous, animated or artificial, scientific or cultural, all of them methods of learning and unlearning that can reconcile us with being part of nature and its wild, entangled meshes. In fact, there is a derivative speculation. It engages in experimental flights and recalibrations of self-transgression, instead of being fundamental and idealistic at its core. It is less about fixed objects and objectives because it focuses on and immerses in liminal, ephemeral, and volatile relations, matter whose emergence weaves reality incessantly.
Das Leben steckt in Molekülen. Was wir unter Natur verstehen, ist ein hauchdünner, kurzer Film im Phantasmagorium unserer beschränkten Vorstellung. Im Kino unserer Kultur laufen nostalgische Bilder. Die rund 500 Millionen Quadratkilometer Erdoberfläche mit ihren Wiesen, Wäldern und Ozeanen scheinen eine große Leinwand für unsere Naturprojektion zu sein. Aber in Relation zu den 5 Milliarden Kubikmetern belebter Erdkruste ist die sichtbare Oberfläche nur ein zäh fließender Schaum von Gebirgen und Tälern. Das Leben passiert im Untergrund, im Plutonit des Hades, unter wenigen Metern blaugrüner Haut. Hugh McDiarmid dichtete, all is lithogenesis, all lochia, carbolite fruit of the forbidden tree.
I would like to So in terms of a cosmic pantomime play, the question comes to be how to think of perception like this, not as a phenomenology, as Merleau-Ponty was interested in, but as architectonics. How can we build a body? How can we sculpt an eye? Maurice Merleau-Ponty, for whom the chiasm is also a key figure of thought, had outlined a world of art perceived rather than known. And the quality of being honeyed expresses the reciprocity of his phenomenological intersubjectivity that would build a collective kind of perception. And it is with such an idea of the world that I would imagine the play in 4 acts could be collectively ideated. That's it.
In our breast, which is able to offer resistance. In this matter, I want you to understand too that when the first bodies are moving straight downward through the void, by their own weight, at times completely undetermined, and in undetermined places, they swerve a little from their course, but only so much as you could call a change of motion. Because unless they were accustomed to swerving, all would fall downwards like drops of rain through the deep void. Nor would a collision occur, nor would a blow be produced by the first beginnings. Wherefore, again and again it is necessary that corpora swerve a little, but no more than a minimum, lest we seem to be inventing oblique motions and the true facts refute it. And next, if every motion is always linked, and a new one always arises from an old one in sure succession, and therefore the primary bodies do not burst the laws of fate, from where does there arise for living from where does there arise for living creatures throughout the world? This voluntas, this purpose of desire, torn from fate, by which we go wherever pleasure leads each of us, and where the mind itself carries us, and where the mind itself carries us. For doubtless, one's own will provides for each a beginning of these things, and from it motions stream through the limbs. Now you see, don't you, that although an external force pushes many and often forces them to move forwards and to be thrown headlong in rapture, there is nevertheless something in our breast which is able to offer resistance and fight back. And whatever things usually arise will exist and grow and flourish and grow and grow and grow and flourish in their strength, insofar as it is granted to each through the laws of nature.
Fabulation 3. A portrait of the artist as a virtual image. Our apartment is on the 9th floor of a building you'd call a Plattenbau in Berlin, but the noble version. When I look out from the northern balcony, I see the golf course, a 1.5 kilometer broad patch of green in the midst of all that Kinshasa concrete. It separates the embassies, ministries, and shopping malls of Gombe at the riverside from the ordinary living quarters of Lingua. The golf course was built by colonial administrators around 1900, not as a golf course, but as a natural barrier between what used to be Kalina, a paradise for Belgian colonialists and their families, with a sewage system, and Lingua, the adjacent workers' quarters for the Congolese laborers and their families without a sewage. In between, the Belgian colonial administration designed a 1.5 kilometer broad piece of green after scientists had found out that the mosquitoes that transmit malaria, firstly, become less when there is a sewage system, secondly, have a flight radius of approximately 800 meters. These days, it is a golf course. I learned this from an installation by Congolese artist Sangoloji. Once
perfecte l'image. Le secret est trop simple. Il fait jaillir l'été chaud. L'âme n'est pas une âme. Elle n'a pas de secret. Elle est petite. Elle s'inscrit parfaitement dans son creux. Sa chambre est un moment d'attention. Qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un portrait? Une différence des temps et des...
To understand a climate is to grasp an atmosphere, says the philosopher Emanuele Coccia. This thought dives into the plurality of beings and things, into the multiplicity of cosmos. To grasp is to take something into your hands. Symbolically, it transforms the hand into thought as comprehension, into sensing as sense-making. And further, if you grasp an atmosphere, you take part in it. It might exist without you, but in a magical turn, it also exists because of you. We are, for better or for worse, an agency in nature's composition. We are learning this lesson the harsh way, and opposition is still out of proportion. Instead of turning a blind eye to climate change, global warming, mass extinction, dying oceans, and all other consequences of our doings, we could seize the opportunity and learn how such ecoclimates can teach us what it means to be sentient co-actors. And in symbiosis with our host, the planet we that call Earth, learn what it means to co-create and inhabit an atmosphere of co-presence.
Behörde gestartet ist. JUICE steht für Jupiter Ice Moons. Das heißt, sie wird in 8 Jahren in das System Jupiter eindringen und vor allen Dingen die Eismonde Ganymed und Europa betrachten. Die sind besonders interessant, weil sie so ganz wahnsinnige, dicke planetare Schichten haben. Dicke Häute aus Eis, kilometerdick. Darunter vermutet man Salzwasser und eventuell Leben, außerirdisches Leben. Und die Frage ist, begegnen wir dann in dieser Hölle, um Thomas Feuerstein zu zitieren, dieser Alien-Spezies, der wir immer schon begegnen wollten? Während Mikroben einfach so ins All fahren können und sehr flexibel sind diesbezüglich, benötigen wir als Menschen kleine Miniaturbiosphären, Raumschiffe, die uns als fragile Lebewesen ermöglicht, im All zu leben. Im All herrschen extreme Temperaturen. Es gibt zwischen minus 250 Grad Celsius und plus 125 Grad Celsius auf ganz kurzen, also schmalen Flächen. Es gibt ein Vakuum, das kein Laut durchdringt, kein Umgebungsdruck, konstanter Mikrometeoritenschauer und gesundheitsschädliche Strahlung und Sonnenwinde. Und wenn wir nicht so ein Raumschiff um uns hätten, würden wir innerhalb von wenigen Sekunden tot sein. Diese Schutzhülle, die wir im erdnahen Orbit oder auf einer Raumstation brauchen, um diese extremen Druckunterschiede auszuhalten und diese extreme Umwelt sozusagen von uns fernzuhalten, ist und muss völlig undurchlässig sein. Und sie ist genau 4,8 Millimeter dick. Also eigentlich nur ein bisschen schmäler als ein Daumennagel breit ist. Und wenn ich mir das überlege, diese 4,8 Millimeter Daumennagelmembran, die mich im Raumschiff von diesen extremen unwirtlichen Bedingungen im All beschützen, dann ist das eigentlich so eine Entsprechung wie diese Atmosphäre, diese 50 Kilometer Atmosphäre, diese hauchdünne Schicht im Vergleich zu unserer riesigen Erde, dem Raumschiff Erde. So ist diese Atmosphäre eben nur so eine ganz hauchdünne Schicht, die allerdings durchlässig ist und uns trotzdem vom All beschützen kann.
Now, since it must be confessed that there is nothing outside the universe, it does not have an end point, and therefore lacks boundary and limit. It does not matter in what region of the universe you place yourself. So true is it that whatever place anyone occupies, she leaves the universe infinite in all directions and dimensions to the same extent. Opportunity for flight always extends the flight. Therefore, the nature of place and the space of the cosmic abyss is such that neither could shining thunderbolts traverse it on their endless journey, gliding on through an eternal tract of time, nor further by their travelling make it so that there remained any less to go. Such an immense supply of space extends everywhere for things, with no limits anywhere in any direction. For all things that have a name, either you will find that they are conjunctions of two things, or you will see that they are events. A conjunction is that which is never able to be disjoined and separated off without a fatally harmful disintegration. As weight is to rocks, heat to fire, fluidity is to water, tangibility to all bodies, and intangibility to void. Slavery, on the other hand, and poverty and wealth, freedom, war, peace, and other things at whose arrival and departure the nature of things remains the same. We are rightly accustomed to call accidental events. Even time does not exist of its own self, nor does death destroy things, so much that it does away with the bodies of matter, but it disperses their union.
In performative flux, softly metastable granularity weaves tangible matter in micro and macro symmetry. Its sensual circulation spirally expand and dissipate until all unravels and until all unravels, until all unravels, until all unravels and dissolves
Sorry, I thought it was Thomas now. Do we lack the imaginative power to leap from our limited humanism to sensing and sense-making with a more open, wilder awareness? What about the courage to dream up a magical imagination that decenters us towards a joyful appreciation of all that exists and lives, that allows us to turn from seeking the next fixed position, the gridlock we call security, to a motion more akin to breathing, a sense of being in and with the world, and a resolute move towards a more inclusive activation that is not afraid of what circles back. I'm so good. This has changed. So he's not participating. No.
And what did Octopussy do? Octopussy laughs. Of course, this was no ordinary laugh, at least not one emanating from some kind of superficial joke and its relation to their unconscious. This was a deep, belly, body vibrating, head thrown back, legs akimbo laugh. It emerged without thinking. It had a bit of a rhythm, a bit of a pattern, and it lasted for a long, very long stretch of a long moment of space-time. Not a laugh at the insanity of her predicament, though it was rather nuts. Not a laugh of the humiliated or the shamed. Less so was it the mean-spirited laugh of the treacherous, ejaculated in the only way mean-spirited, treacherous practitioners can muster, all over everyone without giving a damn. Neither was this a laugh erupting despite or because of the trauma, the loss, the cruelty, the stupidity. No, this was a very different kind of laugh. It was born from the communal entanglement of becoming, and as it turns out, it had a name: love.
In no way must it be thought to be like the truth, that this was the only world and heavens created, and that beyond it those many bodies of matter do nothing at all, since everywhere infinite space lies empty, and seeds, numberless in their number, in the totality of the heavenly depths, fly around in many ways, driven on by eternal motion, driven on by eternal motion. Wherefore, again and again, it is necessary to admit that there are other directions of matter in other locations like the one here, which the ether holds in its greed, which the ether holds in its greedy embrace. It must be admitted that there are other worlds in other regions, in other regions, as well as different races of men and breeds of wild beasts, until nature, the perfecting and creative mother of things, has led all to the final limit of growth. Here, development ought to stop for all things. Here, nature forcefully reins in growth. All things gradually waste away and go to the grave. Exhausted by the long space of time. So too, therefore, will the walls of the wide world be assailed on all sides and sink into crumbling ruins.
Nothing is unnatural, not even artificial intelligence. Nature is everywhere, and all matter exists in relation to others. The term natural is a construct. Technology is part of cosmic ecology, from the depth of rare earth to the shiny surfaces of user interfaces. How do we deepen the resolution of our knowledge? In other words, how and what we feel and perceive? How do we understand, choose, apply, and immerse ourselves into these scopes of participation? Can techniques of resolution, essentially the optics of sensing and sense-making, act as our collective toolbox, as a methodology to chart and forge yet unknown alliances with beings often more sentient than Euro-modern thought had us believe? Isn't this the understanding we need to acquire? Also ich habe nicht genau gesehen, wie lang es war, aber ich denke so 1 Stunde 45 Minuten, also ein bisschen länger, aber nicht sehr viel länger wie geplant. Also keine Katastrophe. Aber super. Vielen Dank alle. Kannst du noch konziser machen, ein paar Kürzungen und dann